let's now look at a quick summary of this reading. The most fundamental point here is understanding foreign exchange market concepts. When you are given a FX rate, so a currency such as, let's say, INR to USD, let's say this rate is 60. There is going to be a base currency and a price currency. You have to know your base. The currency in the denominator, of which there is one unit, is your base currency. The other currency is called the price currency. Also, whenever you have an exchange rate, you will be given two numbers, a bid and a ask. Let's say in a given scenario, you are given 60-61. The bid-ask spread is the difference, which is 1 rupee in this case. The bid price is the price at which the currency dealer will buy, and that is the lower price. The ask is the price at which the currency dealer will sell, or the price that the currency dealer is asking for. It's also called the offer. Now, notice I said the price at which the dealer will sell or the price at which the dealer will buy. I did not mention which currency. The assumption is that it is always the base currency that we are talking about. So 60 means that the dealer is willing to buy the base currency for 60 and willing to sell the base currency for 61. Also recognize that buying the base currency is exactly the same as selling the other currency, which is the price currency. But these numbers are related to the base. That's why you need to know your base. Next point has to do with arbitrage constraints. And what this is saying is that certain relationships will hold because of arbitrage constraints. And I'm not going to go into details here because this is a summary, but here are two important statements that you need to remember, and these are very testable. The bid price cannot be higher than the current interbank offer rate, and the cross rate bids, which we'll talk about, posted by a dealer must be lower than implied cross rates in the interbank market. So this brings us to the question, what is an implied cross rate? The simple answer is this. Let's say you have currency A and currency C, and say that these currencies are not heavily traded. Then you can have a relationship like this: A over B multiplied by B over C. Let's say that this is a commonly traded pair and this is a commonly traded currency pair. When you multiply these two, what are you left with? A over C. So multiplying these two numbers or these two exchange rates gives you the implied A over C rate. So make sure you can do this calculation. We've gone through several examples in this reading. Triangular arbitrage: when you have a situation where the implied cross rate is different from the rate a dealer is quoting, in the sense that let's say you have a dealer who's quoting currency C in terms of A, and that rate is different from what is implied by the product of these two rates, then there is an arbitrage opportunity, and the arbitrage transactions that you will carry out are called triangular arbitrage. Again, the details are in our regular lecture, but remember the buy low, sell high rule. So whatever currency or in whatever scenario the price is low, you buy, and where the price is high, you sell. Forward premiums and discounts. A forward premium is the difference between the forward price and the spot price. If the forward price is greater than the spot price, then we say we have a forward premium. If the forward price is lower than the spot price, then we say that we have a discount. Next, we come to the long-term framework for exchange rates. Here there are several parity relationships that you need to remember, and lots of students tell me that they have trouble remembering this. So just listen to what I have to say over the next few minutes, and I assure you it's not that hard to remember. covered interest rate parity. This is essentially the following relationship. The forward rate is equal to the spot rate into 1 plus interest rate in the price currency over 1 plus interest rate in the base currency. And then if this is for a 90-day period, then you de-annualize, so you multiply both the interest rates by 90 over 360. This particular relationship must hold by arbitrage. If this relationship doesn't hold, then there is an arbitrage profit which can be made. That's why this is called covered interest rate parity. The next relationship is uncovered interest rate parity, which is almost exactly the same, except that rather than saying forward rate, we say the expected spot rate is this. This particular relationship doesn't hold through arbitrage. Why? Because you do not know what the spot rate will be in the future. All you are doing is predicting the expected spot rate, and what you are also saying is that the forward rate is an unbiased predictor of the expected spot rate. So just remember the fact that the only difference between these two is the fact that with covered interest rate parity we are saying forward rate is so and so. With uncovered we are saying that the expected spot rate is that same number. Purchasing power parity, all this is saying is that the expected spot rate, again this is not something that holds through arbitrage, this is an expected spot rate, is given by the current spot rate into 1 plus inflation in the price currency divided by 1 plus inflation in the base currency. I am skipping the details here related to absolute and relative. All I'll say is the one that is used more often or referenced more often is the relative version of purchasing power parity, which is given right here. Next is the international Fisher effect, and all we are saying here is the following, that between two different economies there will be a certain differential in interest rates. So let's say there is a certain foreign country and a certain domestic country. The difference in the interest rates will be equal to the inflation differential. Okay, this is the international Fisher effect. The assumption here is that the real interest rate is the same in both economies, right? So hopefully all this is something that you can now remember. Real interest rate parity is connected. This is just saying that the real interest rate in economy A is equal to the real interest rate in economy B. Okay, next, the carry trade. This is an example of a strategy that you can use to make money in the currency markets. What happens here? All we are doing is borrowing in the currency that has a low interest rate and then buying the currency that has the high interest rate, getting that higher interest rate and then converting back into the low yield currency. We keep doing this as long as interest rates are reasonably stable or the currencies are reasonably stable. The moment there is a sign of instability, then we back out of our positions. So in simple terms, that's what we mean by the carry trade. Then we talked about the impact of balance of payment flows and just a few basic relationships that you need to understand. If in a given economy there is a persistent current account deficit, that would imply that the currency will depreciate. This doesn't necessarily happen immediately, but this would be the pressure. If there is a persistent current account surplus, then there will be a pressure on the currency to appreciate. Then we talked about this particular relationship. Q stands for the real exchange rate, and L and H refer to low yield and high yield currency. Here the high yield currency is the base currency. You need to remember this relationship. What does Q bar mean? This is the equilibrium exchange rate. This is what the exchange rate should be. This relationship helps us recognize that the current exchange rate, the real exchange rate, is not necessarily the same as the equilibrium. The relationships that we talked about in the earlier section, the purchasing power parity and interest rate parity and so on, they predict what the equilibrium exchange rate should be. But since the real exchange rate at a given point in time is probably different, why is it different? That difference can be explained in terms of the relationship shown here. What is this? This is the interest rate differential, this is the inflation differential, and this is the risk premium differential. Different currencies will have different levels of risk associated with them. And in the regular lecture, we've solved this with a few numbers. Then we talked about monetary policies and fiscal policies and how these policies have an impact on exchange rates. The two critical models that you need to understand are the Mundell-Fleming model and the Taylor rule. These are, at least this one is a little bit elaborate, so I won't go into details, but just remember the fact that there are two versions of this model. One is where capital flows are not restricted, and the other is where capital flows are restricted. And these models help explain how different monetary and fiscal policies impact exchange rates. So make sure you know the impact. And then we talked about the Taylor rule. The Taylor rule helps us predict what the interest rate will be in the economy, and that I'll give you the relationship here very quickly. I is the interest rate predicted by the Taylor rule. This is equal to Rn, which is the neutral interest rate. What do we mean by neutral interest rate? This is the rate that will neither stimulate nor retard the economy. So the neutral rate plus alpha, which is typically 0.5, into inflation minus inflation star. What does this mean? This is the current inflation rate minus what is this inflation with an asterisk? This is the target inflation rate, plus beta into y minus y asterisk. Typically beta is also 0.5, but if you get a question on the exam, you'll be given alpha and beta. Y is the current level of output, and y asterisk is what the level of output should be, the potential GDP. So this is the Taylor rule which you need to know. So this difference is the output gap. The next point is related to exchange rate management. Here are the basic points, and this is based on IMF recommendations. If a currency is undervalued, then you should allow the currency to appreciate. If a currency is fairly valued or overvalued and there is no inflation threat, then you use what is called unsterile intervention. If it is fairly valued or overvalued and there is an inflation threat, then you use sterile intervention. Simplistically, with sterile intervention, you are not creating more money. Whereas with unsterile intervention, the government or the central bank is actually expanding the money supply. Next point had to do with currency crisis or crises. Why do you as investors need to worry about this? You might invest in a certain country in, let's say, Southeast Asia, because you believe that the economy is doing very well. You are a German investor. The economy might do well, but if there is a currency crisis, what happens to the currency of the market where you invested? That comes down. In domestic currency terms, you then will lose. So you need to be able to predict a currency crisis. But unfortunately, most studies show that it's very hard to predict a currency crisis. And there have been cases where even countries with reasonably sound economic fundamentals have suffered. Nevertheless, the curriculum gives us a framework to create some sort of an early warning system where you look at several metrics, several measures, and use those to try and determine whether there will be a currency crisis or not. But recognize that it is far from an exact science. And the final point has to do with short-term forecasting. Here we use technical analysis and things such as order flow analysis, how much money is pouring into a given currency, to try and forecast the direction of currency movements. But the most important point here with short-term forecasting is that regardless of the method, or all the methods that are described have a contemporaneous relationship with the exchange rate. What does that mean? That means that whatever measure you are using moves up and down at the same time as the exchange rate. So that is saying that if you are using this metric to decide whether to buy or sell a given currency, that's not helping you, because whatever that metric is doing, the currency is doing the same thing at the same time. Right? So effectively what this is saying is that all the short-term forecasting methods that you need to know a little bit about in the long run don't necessarily help. So that is it in terms of this very long reading.